title of this presentation is Culture, PTSD and Healing, a Better Way Forward for the Yazidi People, and the presentation is by myself, Victoria Head. The objective of this presentation is to look at how we can merge science and culture together for maximum healing for individuals suffering from PTSD. We'll look individually at the culture and history of the Yazidi people, as well as the science and clinical perspectives behind PTSD treatments, and see how we can merge the two together to create maximum healing. The motivation for this project is twofold. Firstly, it's to raise awareness about the Yazidi people, who they are, what they've been through, and how we can really help them as a people going forward. Additionally, it's to answer the question, can Western treatments be used in non-Western settings and with non-Western peoples? For the rest of the presentation, we'll be looking at four main points. Firstly, the culture and history of the Yazidi people. We'll be looking at where they're from, who they are, and what they believe in. Secondly, the current conditions of the Yazidi people from the year 2014 up to the present. Thirdly, modern post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD treatments. And lastly, PTSD treatment and healing among the Yazidi people and how to maximize healing. Before we dive into the heart of the conversation about who the Yazidi people are, I want to give you some context for where they are in the world. The Yazidi are a Middle Eastern people that live in northern Iraq primarily. So what you're seeing on the map is northern Iraq, which is primarily Kurdish. Southern Iraq, or Iraq proper, is typically Arab and what we as Americans think of when we think of Iraq. However, the north is Kurdish. The Yazidi people typically live in the east of the country, near Mount Sinjar, or in the central region near Lalesh, the holy city. The Yazidi consider themselves to be the oldest people on the planet, and their roots trace back to ancient Mesopotamia. They consider themselves to be the first people that God created. Now, with this being said, prior to the year 2014, there has been a little information in the public sphere regarding the Yazidi people, and this has been because, according to the Canadian Parliament, the Yazidi have been the targets of 74 separate genocidal attacks throughout their history. So, due to this lack of public information about the Yazidi, the information in this presentation is gathered from 3 separate sources written by Yazidi survivors themselves. Religion is a way of life for the Yazidi people, and it binds them together as a people. One cannot convert to Yazidism, but just has to be born into it. It does share some similarities with other major world religions like Christianity, Islam, particularly Sufi Islam because of the mysticism that they believe in, as well as Zoroastrianism. Natural elements are particularly important for the Yazidi religion. They believe that they can have healing powers, particularly the soil that's found in the holy city of Lalesh. The 7 angels in Tasmania is easily one of the most controversial points for the Yazidi people because it has been the boiling point for so many of the genocides committed against them. So the origin story goes, God had 7 angels, including Tasmania, who is represented by the peacock. God tasked the angels with creating man. They created Adam, as popularized in Christian and Islamic origin stories, and then God ordered the angels to bow down to Adam. All of the angels bowed except for Tasmania. For Yazidi, this makes Tasmania the most important of the angels and most revered because it shows its allegiance to God. However, Islamic practices view Yazidi as devil worshippers because they equate Tasmania to be the devil. The angel who was with God fell from heaven and is now considered the devil. Lastly, is female influence. It's easy to look at the Middle East and Islamic practices and see them as very patriarchal. However, for the Yazidi, they do have a strong female influence in their religion. First is Maryam Khatun. Maryam Khatun was a real person and was a Yazidi leader, and she pushed back the Ottoman Empire, and she did this through the equalization of gender. Secondly is Khatuna Fakra. Khatuna Fakra is more of a mystical deity, and she is a protector of women and sort of like a moral guiding force among the Yazidi people. So I've mentioned the year 2014 several times throughout this presentation already, and if you remember back, that's when ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, also known as Daesh, were in full force in the region. In 2014 is when they came into Yazidis' homes and villages and forced them out. They murdered thousands of Yazidis, displaced hundreds of thousands of Yazidis, and estimates say that they kidnapped and sold roughly 7,000 Yazidi women and children. Those who were able to escape became refugees, primarily being housed in either other Middle Eastern nations or in Europe. Due to the grave nature of the violence against the Yazidi people, there have been several studies conducted looking at PTSD prevalence among Yazidi populations. However, their data varies drastically. There have been studies conducted in 2016 regarding Yazidi in Turkey as refugees, and they rank the PTSD prevalence rate to be roughly 30 to 40%. However, when you look at Can Ilhan Kızılhan's data, which is out of Germany, they rank the PTSD prevalence rate to be 97.9%. They also show depression to be incredibly comorbid with PTSD. The most important thing about Kittelhand's data, though, is that they show only 0.5% of the people in their study have no effects of PTSD or depression. So what this means going forward is that healing is incredibly important for the Yazidi community because almost every single member is affected. Perceived social rejection is extremely important in looking at restoration because according to data by Abraham and Associates, they show that perceived social rejection mediates between trauma and mental health. So if more rejection is perceived, it makes it more difficult to unlock trauma and regain mental stability. Historically, for the Yazidi, if they convert to another religion or have intimate relations with anyone outside of their religion, they are permanently outcasted from the Yazidi community. However, due to the grave nature of the violence committed against the Yazidi community as a whole, they have taken steps culturally and religiously to prevent social isolation, and this starts with Baba Sheikh. Baba Sheikh is one of the highest spiritual authorities in the Yazidi faith, and he has invoked an ancient cultural and religious practice that involves a cleansing ceremony conducted in the holy city of Lalesh. This helps to cleanse and restore any of the members of the Yazidi community that were brutalized and violated during the reign of Daesh. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. The requirement for a diagnosis of PTSD is the traumatic event itself. By a traumatic event, it is defined by Barlow and Ellard as actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. This traumatic event can either be personal to oneself or it can be witnessed happening to another individual. Some of the symptoms for PTSD can include intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, avoidant-type behaviors, a feeling of emotional numbness, amnesia towards the trauma itself, a feeling of jumpiness or hypervigilance, and a quick temper. Combat situations and sexual assaults are the most common types of trauma that lead to PTSD. So it's no wonder why the rates of PTSD among the Yazidi are so high, because they were both in a combat situation and many of the women experienced sexual assault. Clinically, medication and CBT are the two main ways of treating PTSD. Anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications are used to treat PTSD. However, once an individual stops taking these medications, the relapse rate of PTSD symptoms is incredibly high. Additionally, these drugs have a high addiction rate. Exposure-based cognitive behavioral therapies, or CBT, are also used to treat PTSD, and these therapies have a much longer-lasting effect than medications do. The exposure nature of the therapy is part of what makes it so effective. However, for Yazidi survivors, this can pose quite a complication. Many of the Yazidi cannot return to the places or situations that they were exposed to trauma, and they can't be subjected to violence and war in the way that they were either. It would present both extreme security and ethical problems. Scholars have shown that narratives are an important part in the Yazidi healing process. This is because the trauma that they have experienced is both personal and also a collective experience. Narratives also play an important role in Yazidi culture and religion. Because they have no true religious text, they rely on oral histories to pass down information. So when we can merge this oral history tradition with therapy, we're able to combine healing with culture. Narrative exposure therapy has been shown to have positive response rates among Yazidi communities. This has been pioneered by Maggie Schocher, who is a German psychologist. She's working with Yazidi women who are refugees in Germany. It seems to combine some of the best things about narrative cultural healing and exposure-based cognitive behavioral therapy. Additionally, one benefit to narrative exposure therapy is that it doesn't focus on one single event of trauma. It focuses on the narrative story of an individual's life. So a client and a therapist would narrate out the entire life story from birth to the current moment, and that allows the client to experience trauma both personally as well as through the collective vein of thought throughout the story. Now we finally made it full circle to answer the question, can Western treatments be used in non-Western settings and with non-Western peoples? And I would say that the answer is partially and limitedly. So what I would personally advocate for the Yazidi people would be narrative exposure therapy, but with an extreme focus on using natural elements that they already valued in this storytelling, being able to connect the fire and the soil that they already see as culturally healing in with the narrative that they are writing with the therapist. Additionally, I would also advocate for the continuance of cultural ritual healing, like the ceremony that's performed at Lawlesh with Babashik to restore individuals into the community. Because narrative exposure therapy has its roots in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a Western clinical treatment, it is possible that Western treatments do have some place in non-Western settings and with non-Western peoples. However, I think the primary in treating non-Western peoples should be on their cultural background, and it should be culture first and clinical method second. Well, this will conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something about the Yazidi community. Additionally, if you would like more information, these are the references used in compiling this presentation.